So
All right.
good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the final installment of the CT Colt organizational series for the 2024-2025 school year. We're especially honored to have AATF co-hosting today's event. In this afternoon's webinar, Ali and Kira will guide us in exploring the unique qualities of teaching in the post-COVID era with a focus on the characteristics of today's generation of students. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce our presenters. Ali Cianci has been a high school French teacher at Rockville High School in the Vernon Public Schools District for the past 4 years. She completed her certification through the Yukon TCPCG program and did her student teaching at the height of the pandemic, forcing it to become entirely virtual. Currently, she also serves on the boards for both CT Colt and AATF as a liaison, or as we call them, organizational director. Kira Kabulis, French teacher at Glastonbury High School and Gideon Wells Grade 5-6 School, recently collaborated with Dr. Michelle Bach of the University of Connecticut on a study that will be published later this year in the book Rethinking Language Education in the Age of Gen AI. This past March, she traveled to Brittany, France with the Glastonbury French Exchange Program. And Ali, I believe you took a group abroad to France, n'est-ce pas?
Yeah, I just took students to France and Spain this past April as well. Yep.
Awesome. Lots of traveling for these two presenters today. So with that, I'll hand it over to our presenters, Ali and Kira.
Yeah, so our next slides are just reiterating those. I probably should have clicked through them already. So this is a little the write-up about me. I'm at Rockville High School. I did complete my student teaching through Glastonbury High School, and it was entirely virtual. It was from 2020 to 2021. So that gives a little bit of perspective on the reason why we were motivated to do this presentation about teaching the distracted generation. And then this is Kira's. I don't
That's
know if she
me.
wants to add a thought.
Well, I just want to say hi to Amy Mack. She was my shout out. Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. She's my high school French teacher. Oh my God, it's so fun to see you here. I hope you're doing well.
Hi, Kira. I'm so happy that you're a French teacher. I can't wait to hear your presentation.
Oh, thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, you're fine.
In other news, the Rethinking Language Education in the Age of Generative AI was just published, the book that we mentioned. So shameless plug there. And that was in collaboration with one of my professors from UConn, Michelle Beck. So without further ado, Ali and I will get started.
All right, so this is our agenda for what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to start with who is the anxious generation and the distracted generation, as we call it for our presentation title. We'll move on to how do we help them, and then what can we do at the end of the year, as we're at the end of the year, and how is this going to impact us for next year? And then we'll wrap it up with some thoughts, questions, discussion, and that'll just be open for everyone to contribute.
So I wanted to also start off with suggested reading. I'm not sure how many people have heard of this book, read this book already. It's an excellent one, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. He is a professor at NYU, and this book inspired a lot of what Ali and I talk about in the presentation. I recently read it. I've started reading it a second time. It's so good. It's a page turner. I cannot recommend it enough because, again, a lot of the things that we're talking about and thinking about right now regarding the current generation of students that we're seeing in our classrooms is super impacted by the things in the book that we will also be talking about.
So we'll start with who is the anxious generation and how do we define them and what are we'll see later in it, what are some of the symptoms of the anxious generation.
Wanted to start off with an impactful quote from the book. Children born in the late 1990s were the first generation in history who went through puberty in the virtual world. It's as though we sent Gen Z to grow up on Mars when we gave them the smartphones in the early 2010s, in the largest uncontrolled experiment humanity has ever performed on its own children. So it's also interesting that Ali and I, both recent graduates of our teaching programs, we were some of those children born in the mid to late 90s. And the book talks about the differences between the last of the millennials and the first of the Gen Zs, and the way that the last of the millennials had those phones with the little texting keypads, and they remember the world where there were cell phones but not smartphones. And Allie and I are really part of that generation, where I personally had a texting phone like that for 1 year before I had my first smartphone. And then from there, things have just changed drastically. And it's like we sent our students and children to grow up on Mars and come back. Vastly different than anything we've seen previously. The book dismantles a bunch of counter arguments. Well, different generations have said that comic books and Walkmans and telephones in the household and radio in general and all these things would change our next generations of children. But this is just completely different due to the way that the dopamine rewiring occurs in the brain, the way that it prevents social interaction, the opportunity cost of being in the virtual world as opposed to the real world. So we've sent our children to grow up on Mars is kind of the opening metaphor to the book. So by the numbers, who are the anxious generation? These are some key graphs that show when this changeover really occurred. The iPhone was released in 2008, and it became super prevalent for nearly everyone in around 2012. That was when the cameras were introduced to both the front facing and backside of the phone. So that is really where you see the percentage of major depression among teens skyrocket. So there is a direct correlation there. Similarly, self-harm, there are a number of other graphs in the book that really display how profound this change is from students starting in 2012, and not just starting and changing and now we're at where we are. That graph continues to rise steeply. So the book continues to talk about the two-phase creation of the anxious generation. I mentioned the rise of the phone-based childhood, but this phone-based childhood is in direct opposition to the decline of the play-based childhood, which is a childhood that I feel like I personally missed out on, since this was pre-early 90s, where, for example, my parents will always tell me, my grandparents just sent us out and said, come back when the street lights turn on. You might come back with some bruises, some bumps, some arguments, whatever. But children were largely unsupervised. They took it upon themselves to create games and resolve conflict and self-govern in a sort of a way. So that play-based childhood was already missing by the time the phones came about, and the phones were kind of a perfect replacement for it. Children were in the house, parents didn't know, how do I entertain the child? The screen looks fun. So that's how the play-based childhood was replaced by the phone-based childhood.
So now we're going to talk about some of the symptoms, or what do we see in the distracted generation that tells us that they are in fact distracted, and how it's linked to their phones or other technology. So the first thing that I find pretty evident, and I find it very evident in my own district as well as abroad, across the board in the United States and in several different data sets, there's a rise in chronic absenteeism. So just to define what that means, chronic absenteeism is counted as any student who misses 18 days in a year. So this can be excused or unexcused absences, which is interesting to note because a lot of the times we have students that leave on medical leave or have illness, and those are all excused absences, but those still count towards all the data sets as a chronically absent student if they reach that 18th day. That's 10% of the school year, with the required 180 days. So that is the first symptom. Our second symptom that we see is a technology addiction, which I'm sure we can all relate to and see in our own classrooms. So we're going to talk a little bit about the efficacy of school-wide policies and what do you do without a school-wide policy, which is something that I personally sort of struggle with day to day because there is no school policy. And the third thing we see is students who think that everything is boring. We've all heard it before. How many more minutes are there left in the block? Are we almost done with this? What's next? We are constantly seeing our students want to change pace, keep going. And a lot of that is likely linked to the fact that they're now watching shorts and TikTok and Instagram reels that are changeable and quick paced. And if they don't like something, they can quickly change it. It's almost like changing the TV channel. And that's sort of how their brains are wired now that they're growing up with a phone-based childhood. So I'm going to take a look first at chronic absenteeism, and these statistics were really striking to me. So this is, I gave you the map in the center, which is accounting for the entire United States in the year 2022 to 2023. On the left side, I have Connecticut's statistics for pre-pandemic. So that's 2018 to 2019 and 2019 to 2020. Connecticut used to have about 10.4% of students that were chronically absent of our student population. It rose a little bit in 2019 to 2020, but not significantly. It got to 12%. But if we look at the right side of the map, this is post-pandemic rates. And immediately post-pandemic in 2021 to 2022, it doubled. So we went from 12% to 24% of students in Connecticut were chronically absent. And you'll notice that 2020 to 2021 is missing from the data, and that's because the data was sort of skewed. It's not totally accurate because that's when most schools were virtual. And seeing as most schools were virtual, there wasn't a consistent way to measure how students were fully present for school. But we see that 24%, which is doubled from the prior data set. And then in 2022 and 2023, it only goes down a few percentage points to 19%, but it's not dropping back to the pre-pandemic rates. And even last year's data was 18.7. So we're seeing an even, less of a decrease. We think it should be decreasing more to return back to the levels that were pre-pandemic, but it is taking longer than we expected. So we're still seeing a significant increase in absenteeism. And then we have to consider who those students are. So if you look at the statistics of who is chronically absent, we find that it is a lot of students that are underprivileged. We have students that are disabled students have a 36% more likelihood of being chronically absent. And in addition to that, students of color are more likely to be chronically absent than their white counterparts. And interestingly enough, Asian students have the lowest rate of chronic absenteeism. And there wasn't really an explanation or correlation as to why that is right now, but that is something that they're studying for our data. In addition to students with disabilities and students of color, it's also English learners. So if your first language is not English, you are more likely to be chronically absent. So this links right into our studies with language learning and how does this impact, and is it about communication between the school district and the families? Is it linked to other disadvantages that could be presented to students that don't speak English as a first language? However, the most striking statistic is that in the past 6 years, students with emotional disabilities have had chronic absenteeism at the highest rate in Connecticut, and this is from the CT Mirror. So between 41% to 57% of chronically absent students are those with emotional disabilities. And this is not changed in the past 6 years. So for the past 6 years, it has always hung at about 50% of students, and it's remained there. And then something else that was interesting to me was that students with ADHD, a traumatic brain injury, or dyslexia all showed huge increases in chronic absenteeism. that directly correlates with the pandemic. So those students seem to be those who are hit the hardest with absenteeism post-pandemic. And you can see that shift right from 2019 to 2020, they're only just above 20%, and then it drastically increases to 35% and then up to 40 and over. So I'll come to my second symptom of the anxious generation. This is that they are addicted to technology. So what does it mean to be addicted to technology, and is this a real diagnosis? And the answer is yes. The National Health Institute of Health actually has a study and an official publication called Digital Addiction. And they do link it to being addicted to a drug because, as Kira was mentioning before, it is that dopamine release. So there is also a link to higher rates of ADHD, anxiety, and depression, as Kira was showing in the graphs earlier, with that depression among teens has had a significant rise of over 140% since the introduction of cell phones. And what they're also seeing is that, and they haven't studied ADHD or anxiety entirely yet, but for depression that starts in adolescence is now carrying all the way through adulthood. And there's a higher link to adulthood depression, chronic depression, for those that are addicted to technology. COVID-19, also, they've evidently proven that it is correlated with digital addiction and an increase in digital addiction. And there is a lack of self-control. That is one of the, if you link, we can look into the study. These are all linked, so when you receive the slides later, you can sort of look into it yourself. But if you click this National Institute of Health study, it shows you that these are direct symptoms. So students are showing, and those with digital addiction are having an issue with their own self-control and their impulse control. And then the last one, which sort of brings together our chronic absenteeism together with our technology addiction, it's the emotional dysregulation. And they're also seeing cognitive declines with those who are addicted to technology. So again, that emotional dysregulation, those are the students, 50% of students that are chronically absent are emotionally dysregulated or emotional disabilities, or have students with emotional disabilities. And that's also proven to create cognitive declines. So just as a little personal anecdote, this is something I do. I have an exploratory class, which is taught in English, and part of it is study skills, and I'm supposed to teach freshmen, 9th grade students how to become a good student. So one of the pieces of that class is to do a cell phone study and do a digital diet. How many hours are you on your phone? Are you using your phone in healthy ways? Is it a humane app that you're using it a lot, or are you having a brain drain, as they call it, where it's just like constantly cycling and enticing you to keep using it in unhealthy ways? So with this, I did an experiment on my students the other day where I asked them to put their phones on their desk, which I never do, but put it face down on their desk, because this is, I don't know if anyone else gets this, but this is my students' favorite thing to say. If I put my phone face down on my desk and I'm not looking at it, how is it a distraction? They don't think it is. And so I sort of put them to the test and said, okay, we're going to do that today. And so they all put them down on their desk, face down, and there was 24 students in the class. 19 out of 24 students touched their phones. And this was with the direction that they still were not able to use their phones. It was a no phones class, but it could be on their desk. So just by having it on their desk, they could not resist. That's, again, going back to this lack of self-control and the impulse control. They could not resist touching their phones. There were a few students who didn't touch it to look at it. Many of them flipped it over, and I didn't differentiate between the two. And actually use their phones, but there were a few students who did not flip over their phone, but just needed to physically touch their phone and hold it. It was like a coping mechanism for their emotions, but they didn't use it, which is crazy to think about. And then what I asked them to do is I asked them to turn on their sound for class. So this was sort of chaotic because if you can't tell, and I feel this in my own life, and I have to limit my own notifications and turn off notifications all the time for different apps and stuff, but they were getting notifications nonstop. It was just Snapchat notifications, text messages. One student received a phone call and asked if he could answer it, and I said no. So throughout the class period, there was over 156 notifications that I could physically hear, but I can guarantee you that it was likely more because it got to the point where I had multiple students that were in the same Snapchat group chat and their friends were texting because they were in a study hall, and all of a sudden it was and you can't even keep track because how many phones is it coming from and how do you double count that? So it's sort of crazy to think how much they're actually using and how much input they're getting from their phones all the time. And also as some personal student anecdotes, after doing this and then returning back to my regular cell phone policy, which currently for that class is to put their phones up in cell phone pockets that they can't touch. One student had removed their cell phone without permission, and after I asked her to put it away, this is the emotional dysregulation. It was like she was having a tantrum as a toddler, and she threw her phone on the desk and was like, you need you to tell me and remind me. And it's just their inability to regulate themselves because it's a coping mechanism. And one student, after learning the statistics for our class experiment and what we were doing with it after, said, yeah, I know I'm addicted to it. I need to have it. I need my dopamine rush. So this is even with some students aware of it, that it might be an issue, but they, again, don't know how to regulate themselves or how to have that self-control to live a healthier lifestyle. So we're going to talk a little bit about the different levels of addiction and how we cope with it in the school setting. So some schools may have a level 3, which is a district policy, which says the overall beliefs of the school district and how it gets handled in the classroom. Some schools may have a level 2, which is just a school policy, so different per each high school, each middle school, each each elementary school. And then there are some school districts that don't have a district policy, don't have a school policy, but only have classroom policy. So that's a level 1. I am personally experiencing a level 1. So we're going to talk about what that looks like in different environments. What can classroom management look like and what should it look like? And there might not be one right answer. So like I said, I'm experiencing a level 1 where there is only classroom policy. I do not have a school-wide policy and I do not have a district policy in place for cell phones. So with that, I had started my school year feeling very hopeful, and I've had a very successful classroom management technique that has worked for the past few years, where I do a word wall system and students have, their class has a battery, like a cell phone battery up on their wall, and they see it at 100%. And if students use their phone, they get an index card. They have to write a new word in French. They put it on the wall with the cell phone battery. And if one is placed on the wall, then they lose battery, right? You use your phone, you lose battery. And this had worked for me really, really well because it's a student accountability system. They can physically see the change, but they're also keeping each other accountable. Don't use your phone. And there is a positive reward. I do give them a French breakfast at the end of the quarter if they have the highest cell phone battery. So they all want that French breakfast. And they're competing with the other classes, so they have to sort of keep each other accountable to get that. This has worked really well the past few years, but for whatever reason, this year it was not manageable. And so I've moved into my second point there, which is, do we move to no access and use of cell phones? Which isn't realistic for how they're going to function in the real world, but is it most important for education setting? I'm starting to lean towards yes. So like I said, I have cell phone pockets that they put their phones into every class. And then Kira, if you want to share what you do currently and what level you're at.
Yeah, so in Glastonbury, we have a district-wide policy that we've always had that states that cell phones are not to be used anywhere in classrooms. They are, however, allowed in the hallways and in the cafeteria. I always thought that was fine because as an adult, I need to not use it while I'm teaching, obviously, but between classes, respond to texts, whatever. But after I read the book, honestly, it's such a life-changing book. Can't recommend it enough. Um, it really, really convinced me actually to the point where it just makes so much more sense to have a district-wide cell phone ban, and a ban being different than a policy, a ban being that the district mandates that any student with a phone either puts it in a lockable pouch or puts it in the office or something where students physically cannot access it at any point in the day. Because so much also the distraction of phones results in the opportunity cost of missed opportunities for face-to-face interactions, just all of the moments of the day where you could be talking to someone or experiencing even just community and facial expressions and reactions to things going on in the room that are missed when students are able to access their phones. In the book, it said it was so interesting. A teacher had written into the author and said, give teachers a chance, just ban phones everywhere. And more districts are doing that. So it's interesting to see how it's going in those different places. Um, I personally am super, super lucky this year to have incredibly pleasant students. So I haven't had too many uphill battles regarding phones. My policy is I say if I see it once, you get an official warning, and then I see it twice and I take it, you get a write-up, and that's that. And I've only had a handful, I want to say like not even five this year, of cell phone related write-ups because I also said I don't have a cell phone pouch, but if I have to write up more than five people, I will be buying a cell phone pouch. So, that is how that works. And I also like to remember systems that worked when I was a student. I like to, it's funny, I like to be jokingly like grouchy and old. Like, back in my day, we had to use the office phone because we didn't have phones. I specifically remember being in middle school and finding out that my club or the activity for which I was supposed to be staying after school, had been moved to a different day. And kids nowadays would be like, can I pull out my phone and then just text whoever needs a ride, can rearrange things. But when I was in school, we had to walk to the office, dial 9, and then type your parents' phone number and talk to them on the phone. So I continue to do that with my students. If they ask, can I pull out my phone, text my mom, track is canceled? I say, no, we have a phone right here in the room. You dial 9 and then you call your parent, or I can send you to the office if you'd like to do it in a more private setting. Super interesting. 50% of the time, kids will be like, yeah, that's great because like I don't get reception in this room. Or the other 50% of the time, they'll be like, no, actually, suddenly I don't need to text my mom. So just remembering things that we did pre cell phones because they weren't always there. And even super, super recently, when I was in high school, things were completely different. So voila.
Yeah, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute and we're just going to open this up to discussion and sort of have a minute to chat about what it looks like for everyone here right now. What level are you at? Do you have a district policy, school policy, or are you at a classroom policy? And what does that look like? And how do you manage cell phones in your room? And do you have problems with it? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we'll open this up.
We have a school-wide policy where kids have to put their phones into the little cell phone pockets by the door when they come into the room. For the most part, my kids are very good about it, except for my Spanish 1 class, which is primarily freshmen, and it's really frustrating to have to remind them every day to put their phones away. And no matter how much discipline they receive in terms of either office write-ups or parent phone calls, they just don't care. There are kids who will keep their phones on them and they don't necessarily use them to text, but they use it as a mirror. The other day, there was a girl who was using her phone as a lip liner.
Hmm.
So, yeah, It's just, I find it a sign of disrespect and not caring if they have their phones out. But they need that, like you said, Allie, that dopamine rush.
Yeah, and I find a lot of my students are doing makeup tutorials in the middle of class too. And if I take away their phones, they'll just open up their Chromebook and put the camera on too. So it's just like, okay, we're gonna be distracted in some way, and we're gonna get to this part about how they're just so distracted and what do we do about it. But
And
yeah, I find that too, Lisa.
I'm glad you brought up the Chromebook because if it's not one electronic device, it's the other.
Yeah.
And while Chromebooks are a wonderful piece of technology, I'm lately seeing a lot more harm than good with them because kids are doing other homework in my class. Kids are playing Snake or some other kind of video game that they can use to um, get around the firewall with. It's just, it's upsetting.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else?
I do, in my own experience, see teachers building wide grappling with this, and we have we're a one. I work in a one school district, because we're a regional high school, and so I suppose we would be all the things. We would be levels 1, 2, and 3 because we have a district and a school policy. Um, However, I think that any policy or ban or anything that's implemented building or district wide isn't going to have any success in the classroom without effective classroom management. I think that those two things really go hand in hand, and so I love that you're both addressing equally those two sides of the coin. I think that without effective classroom management, the phones are going to be out. But likewise, I think when we are really talking about um, sort of at an addiction level, and I think we've all seen students that just want to have their phones versus the students that we can tell are very, very addicted. Um, I think that even classroom management, if it's not backed up with a consistently um, enforced policy at the building and at the district level with administrators, then any classroom management efforts are destined to fail. So I think they're two things that really go hand in hand, and that's what I'm seeing in my building with my teachers.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm seeing, as Lisa mentioned, I had the same thought. Consistency teacher to teacher. I I can't help but think of a conversation I had with a student where they had their phone out just on their desk, and I was like, it's got to go away. That I'm seeing, that's number one. Number two, I'm gonna take it. And he's like, I'm not using it. We're transitioning. You're about to start. We haven't started yet. And I was like, no, in the book, it actually says that having it out on your desk at all, something about the anticipation of it possibly buzzing or anything, it changes the quality of the interactions that you're having with the people in the room. So regardless of whether or not I'm even teaching, that's there. And then he's like, you're the only teacher that's crazy about it. And I was like, uh-oh. Um, because we want that consistent experience teacher to teacher as well. But that made
I
me
have
feel good. I
found
was like, I'm doing a lot here.
I have found that the students just use that to gaslight us. They will admit that in my
True.
building. And also, when we first rolled out our school-wide, district-wide, whatever you want to call it, policy, I remember talking about it to my teachers as like a big game of Red Rover, Red Rover. Like we're all holding hands, right? And we all have to hold tight. And the first person to let go and let the kids run through, aka use their cell phones, like then we've lost the game,
Yeah.
right? And we were even joking about like which teachers would be on the end of the Red Rover line so that there was like less of a chance of them letting go. But it is true, your point is well taken, Lisa, about consistency from teacher to teacher.
I'm seeing it's already 4:38, so I
I
kind
was
of
gonna
want
say, in the
to
interest
keep
of
moving.
time, we will we'll go back to what we do about this now. So
There
oh,
are
there we go.
solutions, I promise. I mean,
There are
not perfect
solutions. We're gonna
solutions.
get to that now. So that
Um,
last symptom, and this is not gonna take, hold on, I can't see my screen. All right, there we go. So the last symptom we found was students think everything is boring. And so we sort of thought about this, and this is obviously due to constantly changing media on their phone. Like I'm saying, with TikTok, they can just scroll. It's like changing the channel. They're bored, they keep going. And then it also leads to increased impatience because they don't have wait time. Wait time doesn't exist for them. They can just change what they're doing. So that lack of like practicing how to wait is leading to like hyper impatience where they can't handle even sitting for a minute without doing something. And then it's also showing us that as teachers, as educators, parents, communities, we need to be teaching them how to be bored. And there's also a lot of data that says knowing how to be bored boosts creativity in students, and it also reduces attention-seeking behaviors, which are things that, for classroom management purposes, this is what we may struggle with those who are addicted to their technology. So now we're going to get to what can we do to help the students.
So, as I was reflecting upon the book that I was reading and also thinking about how it connects to my practice, how it connects to the community as a whole, parents, everyone who works with children in general, there were a number of things that popped out to me that people can do to help students and young people break this sort of addiction that they have. Because, as Ali said, it's now diagnosed as an addiction. And those of us who teach younger students can see it even more profoundly than people with older high schoolers. So the first thing is more independence in the real world and less independence in the digital world, right? We're overprotecting students in the real world and underprotecting them in the digital world. Of course, we're always concerned about that parent phone call, who allowed this child to push this other child and scrape their knee on the playground, and who allowed this, that, and the other thing. But in reality, students and children are in a phase of their lives where they need to learn via experiences. There's only so much that we can do for them by teaching them about SEL and social emotional health and learning and these sorts of things, and so much more that students can understand by discovering it, right? You can hear the best advice, but until you learn it for yourself by experience, it's totally different. Therefore, the Let Grow project, which is linked here and in the set of links that we will provide you later on, is super intriguing to me. It's the most basic thing ever. I mean, it's not the most basic thing because it's honestly, in my opinion, kind of groundbreaking, where we allow young people to do simple tasks that make them feel more independent, self-reliant, and resilient. So that could be anything, and they're super mundane as well. Anything from cooking dinner on their own for the family to going out and running errands by themselves or doing the laundry without parent supervision or parent intervention or riding their bike to school, obviously, given you want to be at a school that has a decent sidewalk and safe conditions. But any one of these ideas that I have listed here, running errands, cooking dinner, watching a younger sibling, any kind of babysitting, mentorship that they can do. Again, and it doesn't have to be in the most complicated way. It doesn't have to be an official camp counselor kind of a position, just watching a younger sibling if they have one. So these are all really cool things that children can do to become more independent and self-reliant. We don't have time for the video, but it is simple yet revolutionary. Don't take my word for it. Listen to all of these parents and teachers talking about it on the website. Okay. And so what does that look like in the world language classroom? I like to encourage student independence in everyday tasks. So for example, I recently was beating myself up over not giving students a clear template for a project that I wanted. I wanted my little sixth graders to do just talk about 6 important people in your life and then meet each one of these requirements: physical description, personality description, what they like, why they're important to you, simple things. And I was originally thinking, oh, I should have a box where they can put the picture and then 6 lines, label them 1 through 6. You need to have each of the 6 requirements. And then I realized that there is a mental lift that occurs when students take that list, they read it, and then they transfer it over on to the paper. I handed them blank pieces of paper instead of handing them the templates, partially because I just didn't have time to make a template. But then as I was doing it, realizing that this is actually so helpful for them, asking them to be responsible enough to reread the directions several times and ensure that each and every piece is there and in their final finished product. That's a step towards independence, a small one, but an important one nonetheless. Similarly, less scaffolding in general, right? I know it's exhausting, but thinking about how we can bring back techniques that involve less guided hand holding kind of a thing and more just how much can you actually be present in this room and take your own notes. And obviously there are students with IEPs and 504s and official plans that need the differentiated versions, but if we let go of some of the anxiety of I don't think they can do it, and we encourage them to try to think for themselves and read the directions for themselves, it's really interesting what students are able to do. And lastly, building community and creating social situations. As I mentioned, there's only so much that students can learn from learning about social emotional learning, and there's so much more that they can learn from the experiential side of it. So how can we create community in class? How can we put them in situations where they have to talk to people who aren't necessarily their friends, people who are their friends? The face-to-face element of it and taking away the screen that's often situated in between people. So, but to be more specific, I already mentioned the blank sheet of paper example. Don't scaffold all the thinking out of it. Encouraging independence is huge. I don't know if it's because I don't know, I'm newer to teaching. I want to give in when students have a question. I want to be able to answer. I want to be able to help them. But taking a step back, and when a student asks, comment dit-on, 10 different times, and I find that I'm just a dictionnaire and I'm not actually helping the student learn how to figure these things out on their own or even remember the word that they're asking me for beyond the 2 seconds of short-term memory it takes for them to hear the word, type it on a paper or write it on a paper. It is really important to ask yourself, what do you want students to get out of this? And how can I teach them how to learn? Because my goal is for them to enjoy French and want to use it elsewhere. But also, if they take my class and they learn nothing besides learning how to learn, that's also an invaluable skill. So teaching them that you have notes to reference, you are often allowed to use word reference, or if you're not, you should be able to tap into some of the circumlocution strategies that we've discussed. There are different ways to do assignments other than just asking for someone to give you the answer and having someone scaffold all the thinking out of it. Similarly, encouraging accountability. Active studying is a skill that students have really begun to profoundly lack. This whole staring at a piece of paper and thinking that they're absorbing the notes by osmosis is so much different than saying the notes out loud, being quizzed by a friend, getting up, using the whiteboards, rewriting the notes, things that they can do to engage with their learning rather than just passively assuming that they're absorbing it and wanting participation credit for just showing up to class and like breathing or whatever. So assessments help students learn, and college should not be the first time that they fail. I recently had my French threes, which is kind of late for not knowing your simple present tense. But I had students at the end of the year just now take a quiz on regular IR, RE, and ER verbs. And a number of students failed, and they wanted to know why they failed because they had been to class and they're like, I think this reflects on how you are as a teacher. And I responded with, well, you knew exactly what the quiz was going to be. We went over it in class. I answered questions. There were a lot of students who had no questions, who assumed they just got it because they did it without thinking. But it's really important to encourage students to self-evaluate and know what they need to study and help them figure out where their studying should start so then they can do it on their own and have an opportunity to fail. I did give them the opportunity to retake the quiz, but if they don't fail that first time, they don't realize that they have work to do. So accountability is huge. Community building as well, especially here at the end of the year. I've been doing a lot with target language card games. When I went to France recently, I brought back Jeu de Famille, which is Go Fish, but just in French. And that's great for vocab. I have students ask each other in French as they're playing the game. Est-ce que tu as le numéro 2 dans la famille? Éléphant or whatever, because they're organized different numbers of characters in the families. And then that's an easy way to have them practice interpersonal. I am strict. I grade them. Did you or did you not use 100% target language during the game? Similarly, creative group work. Creativity is something that students kind of, it's a muscle they need to flex. They spend a lot of time doing, again, just scaffolded activities. You need to learn XYZ, and it's really great to give them the opportunity to think creatively and to do so in groups, because groups, you have more ideas to compile, and then you have to work through that whole negotiation of ideas and leadership and different ways to work collaboratively in a group with minimal teacher supervision. Um, and oh yeah, collaboration between different grade levels as well. Obviously, this is a tougher one to coordinate. But if there's any way that you can get older students to mentor younger students or teach some kind of one-on-one tutoring lessons, whatever it is, it's funny because they all kind of think it's for the younger students to help them in ways that you couldn't help without being in a one-on-one sort of scenario. But a lot of it really is for the older kids as well. They get to mentor, they get to model and feel more confident in themselves and their independence. And it's really beautiful. I had a recent experience where the seniors, since I work at both the high school and the middle school, we were able to coordinate a massive, chaotic Zoom call between the high schoolers, the seniors, and my sixth graders in the morning. And it was really, really amazing. The collaboration I was seeing and the feedback received from both the high schoolers and the sixth graders. So that was very cool.
So these are some examples from my class. I'm not going to go too in depth because I want to make sure we have time to get to our examples that we would like to have time to chat about it. But for scaffolding, same sort of things as Kira, giving them blank pieces of paper, having them write their own checklist or rubric. What do they think is expected? Telling them failure is good, and that if they struggle with this, it's okay, and encouraging them to fail so then they can learn from their mistakes. And then creative drawing, I like to sometimes just say, okay, take a minute and draw something funky with at least 5 vocab words. And it takes time, but it also gets that creativity going. For independence, it's about those class routines, making sure they're self-sufficient, they know where to go for things, using resources before they use me as a resource, free time activity board for those that are more fast-paced and are done with their work earlier. For accountability, don't repeat directions and don't budge. If you make that an expectation, then they're going to start to learn to active listen. Do some goal setting and check back in on their progress. I just did a student conference about where are we on the ACTFL scale, and am I at novice? It's with my novice level students. So have I moved from novice low to novice mid at this point, or am I at a novice high, and how do I get there? And then community, again, group work games, assigning roles in a group so that they are accountable again, and then puzzle assignments that require work between 2 partners.
So to kind of sum it up, why is it important to increase their responsibility if we feel that they can't handle it? Again, college should not be the first time that they fail. I really believe in showing students what it's like to have an experience where they don't do as well on an assignment because they need to learn that effort is required. That goes right along with students need to learn experientially. And then finally, lately, I've been thinking a lot about the push and pull between flexibility and accountability. So, for example, today I had a student in my French 1 class. She's a lot, and she doesn't know that what she says is often really, really serious. For example, the other day she said something so wild that all I did was just write the quote on the write-up slip, and she got a Saturday detention for it. And so she does that sort of thing often. Um, the accountability was me writing her up for the thing that she said. But then flexibility. Today she came in, she was pleasant. Did she raise her hand to participate? No. Was I tempted to cold call on her? Yes. But me being flexible was, you know what? She has her head down on her desk today. She's not verbally inciting things. So she's going to have her head down on her desk. So that push and pull between flexibility and accountability, what do students need? Of course, I was like, we have the interpersonal speaking final today. Don't you want to study? Don't you want to engage in these activities where I'm really, really helping you know how to perform well? No, no, she's taking a nap and that's okay. So flexibility versus accountability, and those standards vary, of course, from student to student. Oh, yes. So people are tempted to ask, but if you do all these things, take away technology, because if you've noticed the things that Ali and I mentioned, almost none of them include any sort of technology. How will they learn to use technology in the real world? What if they don't learn to use ChatGPT? What if they don't know how to use an iPad? It's fine. It's literally fine. In fact, actually, if you click through again, it's better to have good literacy skills because developing literacy skills and critical thinking will improve their ChatGPT user learning experience. Because I, for example, did not grow up on ChatGPT, but I feel as though I use it quite well. So moving on. At the end of the year, I understand it's that final push. It's tough. So what can we do in these last couple weeks of school? Definitely keep in mind the detoxing. So if you've been in a classroom setting where you use a lot of fun digital activities and then all of a sudden you try to go cold turkey on this whole addiction thing and just say, no, no more paper and pencil. That's it. Understand that when you take away their devices, as you've seen, um, there's a bit of a pushback, they become irritable. There's a bit of shaking. They need to go to the bathroom really bad and for almost the entire period. So obviously flexibility and accountability, we can't change everything in a day, but we can take baby steps, and we can reconcile the daily struggle with the long-term benefit bit by bit. Yeah, we can strike a balance for sure. Now is the best time to experiment with what will work for next year. I'm in exam mode, but I'm also, all right, you finished your exam for today. Let's play cards. And it's fun for the high schoolers. I had a really great experience yesterday with my freshmen, not honors freshmen, completely in target language. I sat there and I played cards with them. And I know that that goes against what I said before. It should be student conflict regulation doing it by themselves without a teacher. But, I was only there with that one group, and that was a really nice way to build relationships nonetheless. Oh, so I made this little continuum graph on things that are high efficiency, low effort. On This is the x-axis. I haven't done math in 10 years. And the most beneficial for students on the y-axis. So what we should not be doing is over here on the zero spot right here at the end of the year, creating lessons with tons of scaffolding because that's a lot of work. And if we're being honest, students don't care right now. Maybe later on. I'm not saying don't scaffold ever. Definitely scaffold. But at the end of the year right now, we're thinking about low prep, and doing what we can to encourage students to exist without their technology. So have students play games in groups, give them a creative group task, watch a full-length movie. I used to get so excited about movies, watching that cart roll out when I was in middle school, high school. Now students can barely sit through a 2-minute video, but you know what? Doing things to push their tolerance for boredom.
So we do have this little takeaway document for you where we put a bunch of ideas for collaborative group work games, and a lot of them are borrowed a lot, and some of them are ideas that I feel like every teacher knows, but it's good to revisit them. So we'll send this doc out to you, but it has collaborative group work, different games you can play, and then also we put in some suggestions for accountability and independence building for the students. So we will share that with you. And at this point, it is 5 o'clock on the dot. So I hope this was useful for everyone. And we're happy to stick around for questions, thoughts, discussions if you would like. And I'll stop sharing so I can see everyone.